Amanai had guarded the palace for 10 years, his blade loyal, his eyes blind to beauty, his heart trained to be numb. But when Princess Kasiya stepped barefoot onto the marble floor of the bathing chamber, everything inside him cracked. She wore nothing but golden silk and shame. "Turn around," she whispered, voice trembling, though she was a daughter of the crown. He didn't move. His orders were clear. No one else was to guard her this night. He was to stay, to protect, to obey. But no one had warned him that obedience would feel like torture. Kasiya wrapped the silk tighter around her, but her eyes never dropped. She had seen the way he looked at her during court. Never with hunger, only with sorrow, like a man mourning something he never had. "Why did they send you?" she asked, voice a breath between rage and fear. "Because you don't look at me like the others do?" Amanai didn't answer. He had trained since he was a boy to guard the daughters of the gods, and she was the last unspoiled one, the Virgin of Osiris, destined to marry a pharaoh she had never met, to serve as queen, untouched, unseen, unclaimed. Her virtue was sacred, her body, royal property. His touch would be death. "Do you fear me?" she asked, stepping closer. Her perfume, lotus and amber, wrapped around him like chains. "Or do you fear yourself?" "I fear what would happen if I forgot who you are," he said, finally lifting his eyes to meet hers. She was trembling. So was he. "And who am I?" "A promise made to a god." Kasiya's throat tightened, and her voice cracked. "And what are you?" "A man," he said. "A cursed one." Silence swelled between them. The torchlight flickered on the alabaster walls, the air thick with heat and danger. "Then curse me too," she whispered. "Just for one moment, Amanai. Let me be a woman, not a symbol." His breath caught. She reached up and touched his face. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. Her fingers, soft and trembling, brushed the scar on his jaw. The same scar he got protecting her when they were children. And then he took a step back. "If I touch you," he said, his voice torn and trembling, "they will bury me alive." She blinked, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "Then let them." Amanai stood in the corner of her chamber all night, his sword untouched, but his soul in flames. Kasiya hadn't spoken since she whispered, "Then let them." She had turned away, curled into the furs, her back to him, but he knew she wasn't sleeping. Neither of them were. He had faced enemy blades, desert storms, and treachery in the court, but nothing terrified him like the sound of her quiet breathing in the dark. When dawn painted the limestone walls gold, she sat up slowly, her hair tumbling down her back like silk. "Are you still afraid?" she asked without turning. "Yes," he said, his voice rough. "Of you?" "Of myself." She turned to face him now, her eyes softer but rimmed with red. "They chose me as a bride for the Pharaoh's heir. He hasn't even written. He doesn't know the sound of my voice, the lines of my face." Amanai said nothing. What could he say? She was chosen for her blood, her title, not her soul. And he had no right to speak of souls. He was a man bred for obedience, taught to kill desire before it breathed. "Last night," she said slowly, "you could have touched me, but you didn't." "Because I love you," he said before the thought could die on his tongue. Silence crashed between them. Kasiya blinked, stunned, then stepped down from the bed, her bare feet padding across the cool stone. She stood before him, barely a breath apart. "Say it again." "I love you." His voice broke. "I have loved you since we were children, since I first saw you cry when they forced gold rings on your arms, since they said you belonged to gods, and I realized no one ever asked you what you wanted." Kasiya pressed her hand to his chest. "And yet, you never said a word, because saying it would destroy us." "And silence hasn't?" she asked, her voice sharp with grief. "Look at us, Amanai. I'm being gifted like treasure to a man I don't know. And you'll stand in the shadows, dying every day I pass you by." He caught her wrist gently, reverently, and kissed the inside of her palm. "Then let me die," he whispered, but not without remembering this moment. She leaned in, her lips brushing his, not a kiss but a question. And for once, he didn't answer with silence. He kissed her back. The temple bells rang at noon, summoning every servant, noble, and guard to the coronation announcement. Kasiya stood in the center of the hall, draped in layers of white and gold, her neck heavy with jewels, her lips still tasting of a kiss no one must ever know. Amanai stood behind her, stoic, armored, expressionless. No one could see the storm in his chest. No one could hear how loudly his heart pounded when she turned her head slightly, just enough for her eyes to find his. The high priest stepped forward, voice echoing off the stone walls, announcing that Princess Kasiya would be wed to the Pharaoh's eldest son in 3 days. Gasps, applause, celebration. But inside her chest, Kasiya's heart shattered like a dropped vase. She was being paraded like a divine prize. Her body belonged to the gods. Her future belonged to a stranger. And her soul was already lost, to a man forbidden by law, by duty, by fate. When the ceremony ended, the guards escorted her back to her chamber. But this time, Amanai didn't follow. Another guard took his place. She froze, her pulse quickening. "Where is he?" she asked. "Where is my assigned protector?" The guard bowed slightly. "Commander Amanai has been reassigned." Kasiya's mouth went dry. "Reassigned? He was seen entering your chamber last night." Her stomach dropped. "He didn't do anything wrong." "That is not for me to judge," the guard said, avoiding her eyes. "He is being held in the South Tower until the council decides." As the doors closed behind her, Kasiya staggered back against the wall, her knees trembling. They knew. Someone had seen. Or worse, someone had listened. And Amanai, the man who had only ever protected her, now sat in chains while she was marched toward a throne she never asked for. That night she stared at the moon through her window and whispered his name like a prayer. "Amanai." She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. She paced the room like a caged lioness, her heart clawing at her chest. She would not be a victim of silence again. The gods could keep their purity. The Pharaoh could keep his throne. But she would not let the only man who had ever seen her be buried in shame. At dawn, she rose, dressed in the simplest robe she owned, tore the gold from her neck, and walked straight toward the South Tower. If they wanted to punish him for touching her, they would have to punish her too. Amanai sat on the cold stone floor, wrists bound in iron. Blood dried on his lip from the interrogator's backhand. He had not spoken. Not when they accused him. Not when they threatened execution. Not even when they said Kasiya would deny ever loving him. He knew her better than that, or at least he hoped he did. The South Tower was the final step before death, where traitors were locked before their bones were fed to the sand. And to the council, that's exactly what he was. A traitor who had broken the most sacred commandment, touching the royal virgin. The door creaked. Amanai didn't lift his head. Let it be the executioner. Let it end. But it wasn't. Soft sandals stepped across the floor, then silence, then breath. "Amanai," Kasiya whispered. He looked up slowly, as if afraid she wasn't real. She was, but she looked different. No jewels, no veil, just a linen robe and tear-streaked cheeks. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice hoarse. "Neither should you." Her hands trembled as she knelt before him, brushing hair from his bruised face. "Why didn't you defend yourself?" "Because the truth would destroy you," he said quietly. "And I would rather rot here than be the reason you lose your crown." "What crown?" she snapped, voice shaking. "A throne that comes with chains. A kingdom where I'm only worth what I haven't done." She pulled a dagger from her sleeve, the blade tiny but sharp. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm breaking you out." "No," he said, catching her wrist. "Kasiya, if you're caught, then I'll finally stop pretending I'm someone I'm not." She cut his bonds. Blood rushed back to his fingers like fire. He stared at her, overwhelmed. "We won't make it past the gates." "Then we don't go through the gates," she whispered. "We go under them." He blinked. "The catacombs?" She nodded. "There's a tunnel the priests use to dispose of offerings. It leads to the old servant paths in the cliffs." "That's suicide." "No," she said, gripping his hand. "Sitting here is suicide. Loving me has already ruined you. Let me at least give you freedom in return." He stared at her, this woman who was never meant to be his, now risking everything to save him. He rose, slowly, painfully, and kissed her forehead. "Then let us die as we lived," he said. "Together." The tunnel reeked of rot and old incense, its narrow stone walls damp with years of spilled offerings. Kasiya held the torch with one hand, the other tightly clutching Amanai's as they crept deeper into the catacombs. Rats scattered underfoot, the ceiling low enough that Amanai had to stoop. "They'll notice soon," he whispered. "The tower guard changes at sundown." "Then we keep moving," Kasiya said, her voice steel despite her trembling shoulders. "We don't stop until we see the stars." Behind them, silence. Ahead, darkness. The passage curved like a serpent, lined with niches filled with urns, bones, and forgotten relics. It was here that the gods were said to sleep, and now a royal virgin and her condemned guard were using it to steal freedom. "I trained in these halls once," Amanai murmured, "before I was assigned to the royal family." "Did you know about this tunnel then?" "I was told it was cursed," he said with a wry smile. "They said if you enter without a priest's blessing, your soul won't leave." "Then I guess we're already damned," she whispered, squeezing his hand. His chest tightened. How could a woman raised in silk and silence be braver than every soldier he'd fought beside? As they turned a final bend, faint moonlight shimmered ahead. An exit carved into the cliffside, hidden behind a crumbling statue of Anubis. They were almost free. But then, voices, boots, the metallic clatter of guards. Kasiya's face went pale. Amanai pushed her behind a pillar, drawing the small blade she'd given him. "Go," he whispered. "You know the path. Climb the rocks and follow the cliff edge. You'll find the Nubian traders at dawn." "Not without you," she hissed. "They'll kill you." "Then let them," he growled, turning to face the sounds. "Better me than you." But she grabbed his arm. "You die here and they still win. They silence the only man who ever defied them. They bury the only truth I've ever known." He hesitated. Then they heard it. Another voice calling from above, distant but close enough to recognize. "Search the tomb routes. They may have taken the low paths." The guards were moving further from the exit. The chance was slim, but real. Amanai looked at her, their faces barely lit by moonlight filtering through stone. "Run?" he asked. She nodded. "Run!" Together they burst from the shadows, hearts pounding, breath burning, hand in hand. Not as princess and guard, not as virgin and sinner, but as two souls who had chosen defiance, who had touched fate and refused to let go. The desert wind lashed against them as they climbed the jagged cliff face, fingers bleeding, robes torn, each breath a war. Behind them, the palace loomed like a curse carved into stone, its golden towers catching the moonlight like daggers. Kasiya's legs ached, but she didn't stop. Not when Amanai was beside her, gritting his teeth through pain, his hand never letting go of hers. They were no longer royalty and servant, no longer guarded and prisoner. They were fugitives now, tethered to nothing but each other and the night. When they finally reached the plateau, they collapsed behind a cluster of boulders, gasping for air. Kasiya clutched her ribs, sweat streaking her face. "We made it," she whispered. Amanai glanced toward the valley below. "For now. You don't believe we'll escape, do you?" she asked, turning to face him. "I believe we already have," he said, "because we chose it, and they can't take that from us." She looked at him, his face smeared with blood and dust, and saw, not a guard, but a man who had given everything up just to keep her alive. "You should have let me go," she said softly. "You should have saved yourself." "I did," he replied, his voice raw. "When I chose you." The wind howled between them, the stars stretching wide above. For a moment, it felt like the gods had turned away, that their lives were no longer bound by shrines and rituals, but by their own defiance. Then came the sound of hooves, drums, torches lighting the night below like a serpent of flame slithering up the trail. "They're tracking us," Amanai said, rising quickly. "We have hours, maybe less." "We head toward the traders," Kasiya said, already moving. "They won't turn us in." They hate the palace." He caught her hand again, their fingers interlocking like it was the only thing that still made sense in a collapsing world. As they moved across the ridge, dawn broke slowly, painting the desert in hues of fire and blood. And in that light, Kasiya turned back one last time to the place where she had been raised like an ornament, imprisoned in silk and silence. "They will hunt us forever," she said. "Then let them," Amanai answered. "They can chase a crown. I'll chase only you." Her eyes welled with tears. But she didn't cry. Not now. They had no time for sorrow, only for survival. And for the first time, her heartbeat wasn't ruled by fear. It was ruled by love. By the time they reached the traders' camp at the edge of the shifting dunes, the sun was high, and the scent of dust and smoke thickened the air. The Nubians eyed them with suspicion, especially her. Kasiya had wrapped her royal hair in a simple cloth, but nothing could hide her bearing. She still moved like a woman born to marble halls. And Amanai still moved like a soldier. "We need water," he told the elder, a tall man with gray in his beard and a knife on each hip. "And a place to rest." The elder studied him for a long moment, then looked at Kasiya. "You're being hunted." "We know," Kasiya said quietly. "Then know this," the elder replied. "Your name was carved into wood and burned in the Pharaoh's court yesterday. They say you seduced your guard, poisoned the queen's betrothal rites, and fled to spread rebellion." Kasiya's breath hitched. Amanai stepped in front of her instinctively. "None of that is true." "It doesn't need to be," the elder said. "It only needs to be believed." Silence fell heavy. Then he sighed. "But I've seen enough royal lies to last a lifetime. You'll get water and a tent for the day, but at dusk, you leave. I won't risk my people." Amanai nodded. It was more than they had hoped for. Inside the tent, Kasiya collapsed onto the woven mat, trembling. "They called me a traitor." "Because they're afraid of you," Amanai said, crouching beside her. "You didn't poison anything. You just chose not to be a possession." She looked up at him, her eyes glassy. "They'll come for us. They'll twist every word, every moment. They'll paint me as a temptress and you as a coward who fell." "Let them," he said. "Let them scream it from the top of every temple. I know the truth. You know the truth. And that's all that matters." She leaned her forehead against his. "You'll die for me." "No," he whispered. "I'll live for you." Outside, a child ran past the tent yelling something in a language neither of them spoke, but the message was clear. Riders were spotted. A royal banner waved in the wind. The Pharaoh's elite guards were approaching fast. Amanai stood, sword drawn, breath steady. "We leave now," he said. "No more hiding. We find the truth and we bring it back ourselves." Kasiya rose beside him, her fingers tightening around the dagger tucked into her sash. "Then we fight." And for the first time, the royal virgin didn't wait for rescue. She was ready to burn down the lie they tried to bury her with. The horses they rode were borrowed, not stolen. The elder insisted on that. "If you're going to fight a kingdom," he said, "do it with honor, not theft." By nightfall, Amanai and Kasiya galloped through the lower dunes, heading not away from danger, but toward it. The queen's city glimmered in the distance, a mirage of gold and cruelty. "You're sure about this?" Amanai asked as they paused at a ridge, looking down on the temple where royal decrees were recorded and kept. "If we reach the scrolls, and your name is there—" "It's not just my name," Kasiya interrupted. "They forged my confession. That scroll proves everything, that they're lying, that I never betrayed my crown. If we bring it to the people, the court won't be able to silence it." Amanai looked at her, breathless in the dark, her hair tangled from the wind, her eyes alight with fire. "You're no virgin now," he said. "Not in their eyes, not in the court's." "Then let them see me as I am," she said. "A woman, not a relic." The temple walls loomed ahead, high, polished, deadly. But Amanai had trained in their shadows. He knew the cracks in the stone, the rhythm of the guards, the changing of the torches. They slipped in through a servant's path used once to feed lepers. Now it fed revolution. Inside, the scroll chamber was cold and quiet. Their footsteps echoed as they moved past thousands of records, births, deaths, crimes, lies. Kasiya found it, her name, her seal, and beneath it, a false confession inked by the high priest's own hand. She stared at it, trembling. "This is what sentenced me to a life I didn't choose," she whispered. Amanai didn't wait. He grabbed the scroll and tucked it into the folds of his robe. "Then we use it." A noise, a breath. Steel scraped from leather. "You shouldn't have come back," said a voice behind them. The high priest stepped forward, flanked by 2 elite guards, his face painted with calm malice. "You defiled what was sacred," he hissed. "And now, both of you die." "You lied," Kasiya spat. "You forged my words, you betrayed the court, and you poisoned the future." "The gods demand sacrifice," he said. "Yours will be remembered." "Not this time," Amanai growled. He stepped between Kasiya and the guards. "You want her blood?" he said. "You'll have to spill mine first." "Gladly," the high priest whispered. Swords flashed, and the chamber, once meant to preserve truth, became a battlefield of it. Amanai's sword met the first guard's strike with a crash that rang through the temple like thunder. Sparks flew as steel bit steel. The second guard came from behind, but Amanai turned in time, parried, and drove his blade through the man's shoulder. Blood splattered across the scroll shelves. Kasiya darted to the side, scroll still clutched to her chest, her eyes locked on the high priest. He stood unmoving, robes flowing, watching as if this were theater. "You'll die for her?" he asked. "A woman who's been defiled?" Amanai didn't answer. He didn't need to. His blade was his answer. The second guard lunged again. Amanai ducked low, swept his leg, and brought the hilt down hard on the man's skull. The temple floor shook as the guard collapsed. Kasiya stepped forward now, her dagger drawn. "You're the one who's defiled everything," she hissed. "The gods, the law, the truth." The high priest raised his hands slowly. "You think this ends with one scroll, that truth survives without power to protect it?" "No," she said, "which is why I brought a sword." Amanai stepped beside her, bloodied but standing. "You," the high priest sneered, "were a dog trained to obey. Look at you now, panting at her feet." "I was trained to protect the crown," Amanai said. "Turns out, she's the only one still wearing it with honor." The high priest's lips curled in disdain. "You'll never leave this temple alive." Kasiya didn't flinch. "Then we'll die here, with the truth in our hands." But before the high priest could speak again, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. Not soldiers, not assassins, civilians, dozens of them, servants, messengers, priests from lesser temples, all of them drawn by the sound of steel. The elder from the Nubian camp stood at their head. "I followed you," he said. "I hoped you were mad enough to try." He turned to the crowd. "They carry a royal scroll, sealed in lies." Murmurs spread, whispers like wildfire. The high priest turned pale. Kasiya raised the scroll high. "Read it," she said, "then judge for yourselves." One of the lesser priests stepped forward, trembling. He unrolled it and read aloud. Gasps, shouts. A woman sobbed. The scroll's lie was clear, and now it was exposed. The high priest backed away, cornered by truth. "This changes nothing," he spat. "It changes everything," Amanai growled. "Your time is done." The crowd surged forward, not with blades, but with fury. And for the first time, the high priest's voice was drowned by the people's. They brought her before the court at dusk, but this time she did not kneel. Kasiya stood tall beneath the towering columns, her robe stained with dust and blood, the forged scroll unrolled in her hands. Amanai stood at her side, no longer in chains, no longer in armor, just as a man, bruised but unbowed. The nobles whispered from behind their jeweled veils. The royal advisors fidgeted like snakes in silk. The Pharaoh himself, old and frail, blinked from the throne, his voice no longer needed, his rule already eroded by the high priest's lies. They told you I was untouched, Kasiya said, her voice calm but thunderous. They said my body belonged to gods, that my future belonged to a stranger, but I am not a relic. I am not a symbol. I am a woman, and I chose him. Amanai's chest rose slowly with each breath. He expected to be executed. He'd accepted that since the night he kissed her. But she wasn't finished. This scroll, she said, holding it high, was the knife they put in my back. A false confession. A death sentence. And you all let it happen. A few nobles shifted in shame. Others looked away. You claim virtue is sacred, she continued. But what of truth? What of love? I was never meant to be touched, not because I was holy, but because my touch threatened the lie you built your power on. The crowd stirred. Even the Pharaoh lowered his gaze. So go ahead, she said. Strip me of my title. Call me impure. Call him a traitor. But history will remember this day. Not because we sinned, but because we refused to stay silent. The hall fell into stunned quiet. Then a voice rose. Let them go. It was the elder priest, the one who had once served under the high priest but refused corruption. Let them go, he repeated. The gods don't fear love. Only liars do. More voices joined. A few nobles stood. Then more. In a matter of moments, the court was split. Some defending tradition, others rising for truth. But no one moved to stop them. Amanai turned to her. What happens now? She looked up at the fading sunlight pouring through the high temple windows. We leave, together, and let the kingdom learn what love looks like when it isn't afraid. As they walked out, hand in hand, no one dared follow. She was no longer the royal virgin. He was no longer a nameless guard. They were flame and wind, sin and salvation, and the gods. They watched in silence as two souls rewrote destiny with nothing but love and the courage to touch what was forbidden.